for joining us today on Coastal and Progressive Rainbow Forum on Society Bites Radio. Today we'll be speaking with Marlene RESNICK SIMONS, and will be looking forward to her interview here on Nobody's Perfect Parenting. Let me start over that. Nobody's Perfect Parenting in a World of Change. And the book is excellent. I want to give you a little bit of background on Marlene again. Marlene has worked with parenting teachers and children for over 30 years, directed foster care and counseling programs, and provided parents and teachers education in Massachusetts and Florida. She also taught child-family teacher relations at the University of South Florida for 8 years, and she said she decided to write the book on parenting because I felt it was an expert, although my years of experience would indicate some level of expertise. I undertook this project because although I had a great deal of experience caring for babies and children of all ages, at the time I became a mother, I was overwhelmed with the sense of protection and responsibility I felt for my son. And she holds a Master of Arts in Family Studies from Goddard College. Had the privilege of attending the program on negotiations at Harvard Law School, as well as 3 years in the Ph.D. program of Public and Policy and Child Welfare. She's a mother, grandmother, and she's the author of Only It Came with Instructions, and then her new book here, Nobody's Perfect, Parenting in a World of Change. Marlene, with that, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for being with us today. And I know if the people listened to your program last week, they're going to be even more thrilled hearing this one this week too, because it's a fascinating book. And tell us a little bit about what led you to writing this most recent book you have.
Well, because I published the other book, If Only They Came with Instructions, 20 years ago, my expectations that as a society we were going to be much more focused on helping parents to do a better job. As it turns out, that is not so much the case. And I saw many different instances of that, both in the newspaper and in the media, and in situations that I witnessed personally. So I thought, wow, it's really time to put this together in a second book to help parents do a better job, because so many parents are struggling. The reason, and the coronavirus has made the stress levels so much higher for parents. So we know that abuse and neglect of children has been increasing during this time when parents were isolated with their children. In some families, those bonds grew stronger. In others, the kinds of injuries and incidents of abuse escalated. And so I felt it important to talk about those issues, but focus really on understanding our role as parents. Because when we think about parenting, we may think of how we were parented. We may think of an idealized image of the parents we wanted to be. We may think of how we parent our own children. If you're lucky, you may have had parents who were loving, who provided encouragement, set boundaries in a healthy way, and provided moral guidance and helped you to become a good decision maker and a responsible individual. That's not the case, I think, for the majority of children in our culture. And one of the things that happens at the very beginning, and I talk about this a lot, is the lack of information that parents have about child development. You don't get any information about child development except if you attend some psychology classes in child development, or if you're an early childhood specialist and you get that kind of education. Where I saw things go wrong in the many years I worked with individuals, with families, and in groups, is the misunderstanding that takes place at a very early age, and it's usually around 18 months, when children are talking in sentences, and they're very articulate. 18 months, 2 years old. Children are incredible in terms of their language development. What parents misinterpret is that they think that language development correlates to children's emotional development. And emotional development is really about impulse control. So you have children talking in sentences, knowing what they should do or shouldn't do that a parent wants them to do, but not really having the impulse control to stop themselves. And what happens when parents don't understand that there's a gap there's just a gap, is that parents take it personally. And I've heard parents say this, and this across the board: my child doesn't respect me. My child doesn't listen to me. That has nothing to do with respect or the child's ability to listen. They don't yet have the impulse control to stop themselves. And so when parents interpret that as my child doesn't respect me, it gets very adversarial. And a parent feels that the child is acting out against them. They take it personally, and they get down to their child's level and start fighting word-wise or physically on that level. When, in fact, if they could understand that the child doesn't have the ability to comply yet. And the way that you help children develop the impulse control to do that is, instead of yelling at them over and over again to do the same thing, after once or twice asking them, you get down to their level and say, I really need you to do this. Can you do it? And it's amazing how easy it becomes to get a child to comply. If a child cannot comply, then gently you take them and lead them, whether it's getting dressed or going to the bathroom or whatever it is. You can pick a young child up and help them do that and explain to them, I'm doing this in order until you can do it for yourself. And I always tell parents, when you set limits, you have to hold my hand when we cross the street, rather than because I said so, because it's dangerous and my job is to take care of you, and that's what I'm doing until you can do that for yourself. And when parents do that, children get it. It doesn't get into a battle of wills. And I really encourage parents to explain what they're doing, because if you don't tell children why you're doing what you're doing, how can it make sense to them? They think it's just a battle of wills. They don't know what your reasons are. And when you explain to them and help them and stop them when they need to be stopped physically, and not in a hurtful way, but to say, you're in a danger zone now, I'm going to help you. That really is one of the major things I have seen go wrong in parenting. And what happens is that at 18 months or 2 years old, things get set off to are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Hello? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I was getting beeped and I didn't know if it got disconnected. And so what happens is that gets set off into a trajectory that's a downhill trajectory in terms of the relationship. So parents get angrier instead of being the model and the person to show them how to do what they want. So
I think
that is, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you already started on, I think it could help some if you just summarize through some of the, I know you did the different stages. You did the birth to 12 months and then each of the stages that they're 11 to 14 and so forth. If you could just summarize some of the major points in this area, it might give people some interest in learning more about this, because you excellently define some of these areas. You show what to expect and what not to expect and how to handle these. If you could just walk through some of these a little bit, I think it'd be really fascinating to people who don't understand.
Yeah. Wow. Ages and stages is really probably the most important, other than dealing with emotions and problem solving, is the most important information I think that parents need. And I basically use Erik Erikson, who's a psychologist whose stages of emotional development are really the basis for a lot of work with children and families. And that the first 12 months of life is really about trust or mistrust. And children in that first year learn to trust the world in which they live if they are taken care of well, if they're fed when they're hungry and changed when they're wet and soothed when they're hurt or in distress. And that is how they approach the world as a place that they can trust, or the people who are caring for them as those who they can trust. And then it's really 12 to 24 months. It's really, I put it more in sort of 18 months to about 4 years old. It's a very confusing time because, as I said, children develop the verbal skills. And and when parents confuse that intellectual development, which is demonstrated by their verbal acuity, with their emotional development, that they run into problems because the expectations are not in line with children's ability to control their behavior. And if parents understand that it's not that their children are being disrespectful, but they don't yet have the emotional control actually to make those changes, to do what the parents want, to comply. And I think I mentioned in my book that the most dangerous time in the life of a child is during the toilet training phase, because parents interpret their lack of control as rebellion. They don't want to listen to me. They don't want to do what they're supposed to do. And that's when fatal child abuse is most predominant, during those early years. And so much of it is misunderstanding of what's going on for children. Now, the other part of that is that, and you know, I hear it so often of people saying over and over again, good job, good job, good job. And it distresses me because I feel like children don't have an opportunity to have their own experience. Everything is being judged by the authority figure, and that focuses kids on pleasing their parent as opposed to learning and experience in what happening is going on. The other thing I wanted to just point out briefly during that period of time, when children are not doing a good job verbally when they're trying to express themselves and don't do that, often biting. They act out by biting. So one of the things that they do a lot in early childhood centers is during that period or earlier, they teach children some sign language, because when children are able to communicate, it just lowers their level of frustration. And I focus a lot on those years because they really create the emotional landscape that I think children carry through to adulthood. And the image that I use to help people understand how powerful their role in that early phase from 18 months to 4 years old is I relate it to a part of chaos theory, and it's called sensitive dependence on initial conditions. And the image that's used to explain that is often the build-up to an avalanche, that you have a mountainside and a snowfall happens, and another snowfall happens, and another snowfall happens, and then all of a sudden that one last snowflake or one loud vibration will set off a huge destructive avalanche. And that is